Good morning. Thank you guys for joining me today. I hope that you've had an amazing start of your week. So let's go ahead and take a moment and share a win that you have experienced in getting ready for this first week of school before we center on our norms and the rest of our agenda. I'll start us off. Guys, I'm so excited that the emphasis that we placed on strong first week systems has paid off. One of my campuses, we focused heavily on co-planning opening procedures. Last year, he started late in the year and just kind of felt a bit off balance all year, but he's completely prepared this year with systems in place, ready to welcome students on the first day. So excited about that. Who else wants to share?
I will. At our school, our social studies department has already rehearsed our like day one lessons and given each other feedback. So we were able to start off creating a strong culture of feedback within the department.
Oh, that's good. That's so important. So our norms are posted, and of the four here, I'll commit to being fully engaged. As I know we had to cut the CLT meeting short the last time due to an emergency phone call, but please identify a norm that you'll plan to prioritize during today's meeting, and feel free to share that in the chat or out loud. Bilal, can you read what you're committing to?
Yeah, I'm committed to a growth mindset. I really want to learn a lot this year. This will be my first year supporting the social studies department.
Oh, great. Well, welcome aboard. Before we begin, make sure you have your eighth grade IPC, your marked up teacher guide, a completed no-show chart, your exemplars of the exploration and colonization 8.2A star item bundles that was given to you, and then the resources have also been sent linked in the chat for your reference. Okay, so our goal today is to deeply internalize the lessons that will be covered during week one of instruction so that you feel prepared to lead your campus's PLC. Preparation is key to ensuring that all of the prerequisite steps for a TEKS-based PLC have been completed prior to. So let's start off by reviewing the IPC. Looking at week one instruction, what is the content expected to be taught and how many instructional days are allocated for it?
So looking at the IPC, the instructional focus for this week is going to be lesson 1, exploration, gold, God, and glory. And there's actually only one day allotted for this lesson.
Correct. So looking at lesson 1, we will now deconstruct the anchoring teaks. The anchoring teaks for that lesson is 8.2A. So in the chat, if I can get everyone, what are the verbs and concepts for this text? James, what verb did you have?
The verb is identify. The concepts are the reasons for English, Spain, and the Spanish and the French exploration and colonization of North America.
Exactly. So the rigor is centered on correctly differentiating the motivations of all three of these nations, which ties directly into success criteria. The one that says I can identify the reasons Spain, France, and England explored and colonized North America. Did everyone bring their no-show chart for the standard?
The know is the three G's, God, gold, and glory, and the show includes providing specific examples for each country. For example, missions for Spain, which would be God, and fur trade for France would be their gold or their economics.
Okay, good. And I like the fact that you use like the economic verb, the vocabulary. This standard is also bundled with 8.1A, guys. Is there any other rigor or content that we need to include in our no-shows from this standard? Go ahead and read 8.1A and then see what else needs to be included.
So it looks like we also need to include the effects of exploration and colonization.
Okay, great. It's also bundled with 8.10A. What rigor or content do we need to make sure that we include from this standard?
Looks like we need to make sure we include like where each country settled in North America. For example, where did Spain settle, England and France on the map?
Perfect. And then lastly, it's also bundled with 8.23A. What rigor or content do we need to ensure is in our lesson from this standard?
So when I look at this tech, it also highlights how students need to know who explored, colonized, and their reasoning why.
Excellent. Let's go ahead and move to reviewing our STAR questions. Look at the 2024 question 33 and 2019 question 7 that's on the screen. It's also been given to you in the packet, which asked about France. In that chat, I need you to tell me what is the primary takeaway that we must stamp with teachers. Bilal, What is your primary takeaway that you put in the chat, like your response?
The questions focus on France's primary reason for colonization was economics, specifically profit from fur trade and other goods. This is the core concept, and it directly addresses the misconception, failing to identify the God or the gold theme in the correct example.
Yeah, so kids sometimes mix that gold up. Okay, so precisely. Now let's look at question 6 from 2023 and question 43 from 2022. This is 8.23a. Spain, Maryland, and Pennsylvania have been frequently assessed on religious motivation. In the chat, briefly explain how are these religious motivations different and how do you ensure students know the difference? Samantha, can you share your response? I love your response.
So the data shows Spain was motivated by spreading Catholicism or missions, whereas English colonies like Maryland, Pennsylvania were actually founded for religious freedom or to escape religious persecution.
Okay, now let's look at the lesson DOL questions number 2 and 3. The lesson DOL uses the same content from the STAR questions, but it uses new cognitive demands of the STAR 2.0 questions using match table grids and inline questions to assess students' understanding. Briefly explain in the chat, what do students need to be able to know and do to answer these questions? Samantha, I really like your response. Can you share out what you wrote in the chat again?
So to successfully answer these DOL questions, students need to know the precise content distinctions like the other questions, but they do need to do 2 key cognitive actions. So they need to go beyond simply defining God, gold, and glory. They need to know the precise difference in the reasons for each country, especially distinguishing between economic reasons. For example, France and fur trading is gold, and religious and political reasons, for example, Spanish missions are gold and glory. Students must also memorize and correctly link specific examples to each country. So, for example, when they think of France, they need to understand that that goes with fur trade, whereas when they think of Spain, they need to think about missions. And then lastly, students must be able to use their knowledge to correctly sort motivations in matching questions and explain their reasoning. So this means they need the skill to explain why a specific action like fur trading is an example of gold, whereas it's not going to be an example of glory.
Great, I like that. And you may also consider like teaching them some type of alliteration, like F, France, fur. That also helps students as well. So I think that was that's a really good response that you have there. Solid. So my question is, does the lesson address strategies at this level or rigor in your analysis of the lesson?
Yes, so when I looked at the lesson and specifically in reference to question 2 of the DOL, students must identify the motivations of Spain, France, and England for exploration. And the lesson really does a good job of supporting this through the purposeful reading and graphic organizer, where students have to identify each country's goals, areas explored, and reasons for colonization. And then later on in the lesson, students revisit the content multiple times through discussion questions, CFUs, and the closed paragraph activity, which uses vocabulary such as missions, trade, religious tolerance. And so by the time they reach the DOL, they've already processed the information in several ways. And specifically referencing question 3, students need to understand that European countries were searching for faster trade routes to Asia. And so the lesson addresses this through a really good map analysis activity, as well as vocabulary instruction and guided discussion about the Northwest Passage in trade routes. And so overall, the lesson does a strong job aligning instruction to the success criteria because students repeatedly engage with the concepts through reading, discussion, vocabulary, maps, written responses before they even get to the DOL.
Your response shows that you really did your unpacking before the CLT, so great job. I believe that we have a deeper understanding now of the instructional moves towards mastery with this content. So now let's look at the lesson structure and identify key moments for intervention and rigor. Okay, we need to ensure that the team can identify specific actionable lesson upgrades if needed. The Lead Forward Guide has identified 3 common misconceptions. In the chat, which part of the lesson directly targets these misconceptions on the screen? The misconception 1 is not being able to apply their understanding of God, gold, and glory to the examples of economic reasons, and then religious reasons for exploration and of early colonization. Bilal, can you read what you wrote?
Yeah, so in the guided practice, teachers really need to stamp this because it's specifically addressed there. They need to stamp the specific reasons why each country was motivated to colonize, why Spain, France, and England. So that's important. They really need to stamp that during this section.
Okay, great. I'm glad you identified that the script says that the teachers have a stamp it section. So it tells them to say that, but how do we ensure that your teachers aren't just reading these points, but that they truly internalize them and deliver them with rigor?
Well, we can upgrade this part of the lesson and actually dedicate a rehearsal segment in our PLC to script out key questions that kind of clarify the difference.
I think that's a great idea. So we will designate this specific 30-second stamp it transition as the required lesson portion for rehearsal during your campus PLCs to make sure that the teachers are actually like internalizing it and delivering it with a strong stamp it. I'm sorry. Let's plan out the precise language now for what that PLC will look for. You are the PLC facilitator. I want you to script a 30-second summary that clarifies the unique economic and social motives of the 3 countries, using a high leverage question to check for understanding, and place your script questions in the chat when you're done. Okay, I see the following great question in a chat. It says all countries wanted wealth. How did the long-term economic goal of Spain, France, and England differ? That's a great question. So now how would you present this to your team?
All right, team, this is the most critical distinction when talking about God, gold, and glory. Remember that every country wanted wealth and power, but their primary methods differ. Spain focused on missions, finding precious metals. France focused narrowly on fur trading. England was unique, colonized for religious freedom and to profit from commercial resources. Create a question to distinguish between the colonizing countries.
That's a really strong model. That question pushes the rigor and forces the teachers to ground their answer in the content specificity of 8.2a. So we will designate this specific 30-second stamp it transition as the required lesson portion for rehearsal during your campus PLC. So that's what they will be doing. So go ahead and now let's move on to creating actionable steps. For your PLC, the team must now create targeted CFUs based on the anticipated misconceptions. So in the chat, what are 2 non-generic CFUs that you can instantly diagnose if students grasp the distinction between France and Spain's colonization motives before getting to the DOL? James, I like your response. Can you feed out what your CFUs were?
Yeah, so we did 2, a turn and talk and a quick write. For the turn and talk, we said, explain which of the 3 Gs best represents the French goal of fur trading. And then the little extension there, why is this gold and not glory? And then for the quick write, we said Spain established missions primarily to achieve God and glory. Explain the difference between these 2 motives in the context of Spanish colonization.
Okay, so now let's finalize the monitoring plan. In the chat, what are 2 specific look-fors that teachers should use to aggressively monitor during instruction to ensure that the CFUs and the lesson stamps land? Samantha, I love your response. Can you share out what you're looking for during your monitoring labs?
So in the classroom, I've identified 2 labs that I'm going to be looking for. So my first lab, I'm going to be looking for our students correctly listing fur trade for France, missions for Spain, and religious freedom and commercial profit for England as they're working on their graphic organizer. And then my second lab, I'll be focusing on students using the academic vocabulary colony, colonization, and the 3Gs correctly when they're having their discussions during the independent practice map activity.
Okay, principals and APs. In the chat, Please respond to the following question. Which look for will you prioritize in your walkthroughs next week? James, what do you have?
So since we have a high EB population, we're really going to be focusing on the vocabulary-based look for next week.
I think that's a great observation about your EB population and what aligns with what they need. Thank you for sharing. Your campus PLC agenda should dedicate the final 10 minutes of rehearsing that Stamp It transition, followed by your administrator leader giving immediate feedback based on the PLC feedback rubric. So to summarize the action items for your campus PLCs, one, you want to make sure you prioritize that rehearsal. Rehearse the 30-second Stamp It summary, clarifying the distinct motives of Spain, France, and England. And then you also want to implement the 2 specific look-fors during the aggressive monitoring laps. Based on these action items, who is responsible at your campus for creating the PLC agenda, the slide deck, and who will finalize getting all the materials?
At our campus, we'll assign it to our lead 8th grade teacher to lead the rehearsals, while the principal and I will focus on monitoring the look-fors.
Okay. Does anyone
Can I
else
just
have?
chime in real quick also? I know just as an educator, one of the things that is helpful to help me prepare for PLC is just knowing what pre-work is expected. And so if that's communicated ahead of time, teachers can make sure they have their lessons exemplared and all the things that you want them to do so they can kind of move through the PLC more efficiently.
Well, we have a PLC protocol that we have that things that should be done as just leading up to the rehearsals. So we'll just make sure that that's enforced and make sure they'll have those things prior to the rehearsal.
Great. I think that all those are, the protocol is wonderful, but definitely making sure that they get that pre-work, just like we do here, sending out the questions they need to analyze, the lessons, all of those things that they're going to need, getting that pre-work and knowing what's expected. I think those are some great things that we can stamp at the end of this CLT.